Okay. All right. Let's get started. So, uh, my name is Cory. I'm a trainer with Megamation. Uh, a lot of you, I've recognized your names. We've talked one-on-one in some training sessions over the years. If you've attended any of our webinars in the past, I was the one who did them all. Um, and I do a lot of our training videos. So our goal with all of these webinars is to bring up some features that maybe you haven't used before, or that you're not fully familiar with, or that you've been interested in. And it's not going to be a training session. I'm not going to go through step by step how to do everything. What I'm hoping to do is to show you some things that you haven't seen before, and then we can follow this up with some one-on-one training, or with some support calls, depending on what you need. um so as I said, I've done all these webinars. As if you've been in them before, Matt White is here. He's going to be monitoring the chat, and I'm going to take questions at a few different points throughout the proceeding here. And Matt will, if you just put your questions in the chat at any time, and Matt will bring those questions to me when we get to the question periods. Yeah, so that's our layout. Thank you very much for joining, and let's get into it. I think we're going to be about a half hour to 45 minutes. I didn't do a dry run of this one, so I'm not exactly sure on the time. We might be a little shorter than that, but I'm thinking about a half hour to 45 minutes. All right. Okay, so as I said, this webinar is going to focus on our inventory module, and in particular being able to track your inventory using Directline, and we're going to talk about some best practices. We're going to talk about some of the tools that are in here, both in the desktop, and we're going to take a look at mobile as well. So today's subjects, we're going to talk about storing parts in multiple warehouses. That's something it's something that's very common, and something that I get questions about quite a lot. So I'm going to get into that a little bit and kind of show you how it works and why you might do it. We're going to talk about the automatic reorder process, and I know a lot of people are using the automatic reorder, so I'm going to talk about how you do it, but I'm also going to talk about some ways you can use it even if you're not doing your purchasing in the Directline system. We're going to talk about cycle counting, or physical counts, and that's where we're going to get into some best practices, because we're going to talk about setting up categories for your inventory, which is something that's recommended by maintenance professionals and by inventory professionals, but is not something that I see a lot of clients using, and it's really not something I've shown a lot of clients over the years, though it's been in Directline for at least the 15 years that I've been here. And then we're going to talk about mobile inventory. We're going to focus the mobile inventory on the kind of the cycle counting portion, but I'll show you, I'll give you an overview of some of the other things you can do with inventory in your with your mobile interface. So the first thing we're going to talk about is multiple warehouses. And I have here multiple warehouses, header versus detail. When you look into the inventory module in our system, you're going to see two entry screens. So there's a header entry screen and a detail entry screen. And the header entry screen is going to be the basic information about your part, and the detail entry screen is what's going to give you the ability to store that part in multiple warehouses and be able to track the on-hand quantities separately, be able to track minimum and maximum quantities, and the aisle, shelf, and bin where the part is stored separately for each individual warehouse. So let's talk about these two screens. The first one is the header screen. So this one's got the basic information about your part, right? This is where we're going to choose the part number. This is where we're going to It's where we're going to choose our part number. It's where we're going to put in our description. And importantly is where we're going to set the type, which is stock or non-stock. So parts that you're keeping an on-hand quantity or parts that you're not. And the other very important piece is the unit of measure. So unit of measure right here on this part on my screenshot here is each. And we set that on the inventory header, and that's the only place we can change that unit of measure. And this is going to be the unit of measure that we're using the parts in. So this is how this is sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. This is the units that you're using it in. So you might order it in a different units. You might order it by the box, or you might order it by the gallon. But the unit, this is how we're going to use it. Okay, so we're going to use this particular part one at a time. We can also put in the manufacturer and the manufacturer's part number. This is all header information, because this information is the same no matter what warehouse you have this part in. Right? No matter where you've got it, whether it's in your main warehouse or it's in the storage container outside or it's in another facility altogether, this information is always going to be the same. You're always going to use it in the same unit. It's always going to be the same class. It's always going to have the same manufacturer and manufacturer part number. And I want to talk quickly as well about the manufacturer's part number. A lot of people, when they're setting up their part, they'll want to use the manufacturer's part number as the part number for their inventory item, because they want to be able to search by that manufacturer's part number. Because when they're looking at at a bearing, that number is stamped right on there, or they're looking at the manufacturer will put the part number right there on the filter, which is fine. You can use it as that part number, but you don't need to, because when you're searching an inventory header, both the part number and the manufacturer part number are both searchable fields. So when you're looking for this part, you can search by the part number, you can search by the manufacturer part number, you can search by class. It doesn't matter. You've got both of those part numbers there, and we're going to see one more in a second. You've got both of those part numbers there, so you can search by both of them. So there's no need to duplicate that manufacturer's part number in the part number field if you don't want to. So that's our header. As I said, it's the basic information about the part. One thing that I didn't mention is cost. So the cost field right here, that is stored on the inventory header. So that's going to be the same no matter which warehouse it's in. And down at the bottom, quantity on order. It's blank right here, but as parts are, this is going to be a total quantity on order no matter which warehouse it's ordered from or ordered for, sorry. So that's our header information. As I said, it's the basic information about our part. The next screen is the inventory detail entry. So when we look at the inventory detail entry screen, there's a lot more to it than the header entry screen. To bring up a part on this screen, we need to put the part number and the warehouse. We need to, and all of the header information, so all the information from the header screen is right here in this header information section of our inventory detail entry screen. Then we have additional information here that is warehouse specific, the maximum and minimum quantities, the reorder quantity, the account number that it's charged to, and the aisle, shelf, and bin. So that's with the aisle, shelf, and bin, where this is stored in MT, which is the main warehouse. Down at the bottom, we have the supplier that we order it from. A supplier is warehouse specific because the warehouses aren't always in the same spot, right? So you might have a warehouse for your Cincinnati location and another warehouse for your Toronto location. So you wouldn't order or you might not order from the same supplier for both of those warehouses. So supplier is detail information. It is warehouse specific. The supplier part number, which it's blank on this screenshot. I overlooked that, I guess. The supplier part number right here, that is that's another field that is searchable, and we're going to go into the actual system here in a second, and I'm going to show you all this. But that supplier part number is a searchable field as well. So we have a supplier part number, we have a manufacturer's part number, and we have the inventory detail or the inventory part number here, and each of those is searchable. So you don't have to duplicate them. You'll be able to search by all of them as you go through, or as you're looking for your part. So if you've just got the supplier's part number, you can search for it by that. You can also have the supplier part number put onto your requisitions or purchase orders, so that when you send them to the supplier, or you send a request for quotation to the supplier, you can send their part number, or the part number they gave you, so then they know exactly what you're looking for. So let's take a look at that screen, and I want to show you how exactly we're going to use this to store in multiple warehouses. So here's our demo system. This is where we've seen this in previous webinars before. This is just what we use for demonstration. So I'm going to go to my I'm going to go to my inventory module. And if you're not overly familiar with the inventory module, this is what I meant by having two entry screens. We have the inventory header entry and the inventory detail entry. So I can bring both of those up if I want to, and we can set them side by side for comparison. Okay, so we've got a lot more information on the detail entry, and the big thing to note is header entry just requires a part number, where detail entry is going to require a part number and a warehouse. So let's look at the part that we had in our screenshot there. So this part by default is stored in warehouse MT. So here's all the information. We were missing our manufacturer's part number, which we just can type in like that. We're also missing the supplier's part number down here at the bottom. And those don't have to be the same number, right? So we can save this. And this is what I meant by being able to search by any of those part numbers. When we go to the search, we can search by the manufacturer's part number right here. We can search by the part number, or we can search by the supplier's part number right here if we wanted to. And watch this. If I know part of the supplier's part number, I can type that in, and then I can go to my radio buttons over here on the right, and I can say starting with, and I'll be able to find that part right here. And I can do that same thing in the supplier part number, the manufacturer's part number, whatever field, or whichever one I have, I can do that to search for that part. So here's my part, right? I've updated the header information just by filling it out on the detail screen. I mentioned about not being able to change units, so I can't change that from this screen. Now, let's say I need to start storing this part in the Cincinnati warehouse. Okay, if I have my drop down here, I've got a warehouse for Cincinnati, and I say, okay, we got a machine in Cincinnati that requires this cap injection spring anchor capper. So we need to start keeping these in that warehouse in Cincinnati. So I say, okay, let's keep it in. Let's create an entry for that. So I'm going to just hit the drop down here and go to Cincinnati warehouse. And now we're creating a new entry. You see up here, it says inventory detail entry, new entry. So we're creating a new entry that is part number ANCH 00030 in warehouse CIN, Cincinnati. All my header information is still here because that's the same no matter what warehouse we're in, right? It's always by the same manufacturer, always the same manufacturer's part number. But my minimum and maximum quantities are going to be different in Cincinnati. My aisle, shelf, and bin are going to be different because the warehouse isn't the same. So it's going to be a different place. And my supplier might be different. So let's fill this information in. So I'm going to start by setting my maximum and minimum quantities. Then what are maximum and minimum quantities? Well, the maximum quantity is the highest number of these parts that we want to have on hand. And my minimum quantity is the fewest number I have. And why would we fill that out? Well, we would fill that out for something that we're going to talk about in our next section, which is the automatic reorder process. Because the automatic reorder process is going to use these numbers here to help you decide, or to help notify you when you're running low on stock of certain items. We can also fill a reorder quantity right here. So this reorder quantity is going to be used also by the automatic reorder, and I'll talk in more detail about those when we talk about automatic reorder. But the reorder quantity is going to be used because the automatic reorder is going to create requisitions, and when it creates those requisitions, it's going to create them with to either order up to the maximum quantity or order the reorder quantity. And so again, we'll see that in a few minutes, or we'll talk about that in more detail in a few minutes. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the aisle, shelf, and bin. And if you're not using aisle, shelf, and bin right now to track your parts or to locate your parts, these aisle, shelf, and bin fields are just plain text fields. So they don't require setting up admin codes or anything like that. You just go in here and you just type in your aisle, which can be letters, numbers, or dashes. Then you can have aisle A1. Your shelf can be whatever your shelf numbers are, and your bin number. And you can use whatever numbering or coding you want in those three fields to locate your part within the warehouse. The next thing is we'll add a supplier. So we'll go to, I'm going to hit the little search here, and I'm going to find a supplier, and we're going to say we order this from Canadian Bearings, and we can put in their part number as well. Another thing that I can do here is I can put a unit of measure. So I'm using the spring anchor in eaches. So I'm using them one at a time. But maybe Canadian Bearings doesn't sell this one at a time. Maybe they sell them in a box of 12. So I'm going to put box of 12 as my box of 12 as my supplier unit of measure. So then when I place this, or when I order this, it's going to order one box of 12, and that's going to put 12 individual parts in my inventory. So if I set box 12, then it's going to order one box of 12, and my on-hand quantity is then going to increase by 12 when I receive that one box. So now I've got all this set for Cincinnati. I can put in an on-hand quantity. If there's already some in Cincinnati, I can say, okay, well, I've got three of them there, and I can fill in my on-hand quantity. I can also just leave my on-hand quantity blank if I don't have any in Cincinnati, but I'm going to order some. I'll do that. I'll leave the on-hand quantity blank, and I'll save it. And now that part is available to be ordered. So it's available to be ordered for both of those warehouses. So if I go to my search here, and I search by this part number, now I find that part number in two places. I've got it in my MT warehouse and I've got it in my Cincinnati warehouse. So one more thing about the on-hand quantity. Let's say we said, okay, we've got 9 of these in our main warehouse, and we don't need all 9 of those. Let's send a few to Cincinnati. Well, here's how we would do that. We can transfer quantities between warehouses. So we can go to this perform warehouse transfer button right here, and we can send some of these to that Cincinnati warehouse. So we can send, we could send 2 of them to Cincinnati. And then that will change my on-hand quantity. You see this drop down to 7. And if I look at my part in Cincinnati, well, now I have an on-hand quantity of 2. And that warehouse transfer, there's now a record of it happening. So we're not just going in and manipulating on-hand quantity numbers. We have a record of everything of the parts moving from our main warehouse to Cincinnati. So we've got a paper trail. We know where it went. We've got information now because we created this separate inventory entry for our other warehouse. Now we know how many we have in each warehouse, and we know exactly where to find the parts in each warehouse and who we're going to order the parts from for each warehouse. So that's the difference between our inventory header entry and our inventory detail entry. And that's how we're going to go about ordering, or how we're going to go about storing parts in multiple warehouses. Before we move on, does anybody have any questions about that piece, about our headers and details and storing in multiple warehouses?
I think we're good, Cory.
All right. Okay. So the next thing we're going to
wait. Sorry, Cory. One just came right in. Can a
sure.
second warehouse be used as overstock?
You could do that. It would require creating a second warehouse, but you could create like an overstock warehouse. I've seen people do that before, and yeah, we could we could talk about the details of how you would set that up. If you contact support, we could do that. I don't think it would be too hard, other than just creating a warehouse that you would identify as an overstock warehouse.
And another question, does it matter where you enter your part number, header versus detail?
It does not. So you can go through the step of creating your header and then move on and create and then create the detail entries for each warehouse that you're going to put the part in. But if you're just creating it for creating a part that you're only going to have in one warehouse, you can just create it from the inventory detail entry screen. So you can go to the inventory detail entry screen, and you can put in a new unused part number and create your part right from there. Okay. Okay. So let's move on to the next piece, and we're gonna take questions again in a little bit. So if you still have questions, if you think of questions as we move on, feel free to ask them, and we'll get to them the next time we stop for questions. So the next thing I want to show you is the automatic reorder, which this I say automatic reorder, keeping it in stock. This is making sure that your on-hand quantity matches your needs, right? So this is what the automatic reorder does. When you run this process, it checks your minimum quantity, which we talked about on our inventory detail entry screen, against your on-hand quantity. And anything that's at or below minimum, it's going to say, okay, you need to order this. And you can set it to order up to your maximum quantity. So remember, we set our maximum quantities on the part we created. We said our maximum quantity is 5. So it would order up to 5. It would order to bring it up to 5. So if you had 1 on hand, it'll order 4. If you had 2 on hand, it'll order 3. Or you can set it to order the reorder quantity, where you're just predetermining, all right, I want to order this many every time. So I had put in 3 as my reorder quantity. So every time it creates a requisition, because it can't create it, you can tell it to create the requisitions for you. It will create the requisition with that reorder quantity. And I'm going to show you how you can set both of those things up. Another nice tool is to use with the planned quantity on the PM to make sure that your stock is sufficient for your PM. So if you were here for the preventive maintenance webinar, we talked about adding planned quantities onto your PMs so that for any parts that you're going to need for your PM. So maybe lubricants or filters or belts or anything that you're going to need to anything that you're going to need to do that PM, you put those in your planned quantities. Then once you create your once you schedule your PMs, so you run your PM scheduler, it creates your next month's work orders, then you can run your automatic reorder, and you can tell it to include planned quantities, and then it'll be able to order enough to make sure you have enough for those PMs. And the last point is a good point to make. Even if you're not purchasing in Directline, the auto reorder can be used as a report to show you what needs to be ordered. So even if you're not purchasing in here, you can still use the automatic reorder. It can't create requisitions for you, obviously, because you're not creating requisitions, but I'm going to show you how to use it as a report to tell you what needs to be ordered. So let's jump back into our demo system here. So I mentioned again minimum and maximum quantities. So we set our minimum and maximums right here on our inventory detail entry. So I said I never want to have less than 2. So anytime my on-hand quantity drops to 2 or lower, automatic reorder is going to pick it up. I can tell it to order up to 5, up to my maximum quantity. So it'll order however many it needs to order to get me up to 5. Or I can tell it to order my reorder quantity, which is right here, and it's 3. So let's close out of here and let's go to our automatic reorder. So we're going to find it under inventory and inventory automatic reordering. And what we have here is a screen where we're going to choose some options to reorder by. And I'm going to start with criteria. On the right-hand side, I could choose what warehouse I want to order for. So if I'm looking, if I'm in charge of purchasing for the whole, for all warehouses, I can just leave all the warehouses filled in, right? I'm not going to do that because we have too many parts in here. So I'm just going to do it for one warehouse. So I'm going to hit this little eraser button and I'm going to clear them all out. And then I'm going to choose just Cincinnati. And Cincinnati's a small warehouse, so it's only our list is going to be small here, which is good. Hopefully keep it not confusing. Another thing I can do is I can filter by inventory classes. So if I'm just just wanting to check on filters because I'm doing my spring filter change for my HVAC units, then I could I could put in a class here, a class for filter, and then it would just narrow it down and it would just show me what needs to be ordered for filters. Okay, so I can do that by class if I want to. I'm going to leave it just fairly broad and just do it for all of this warehouse. Now, if I want to use my planned quantities, so I want to use this to make sure I've got all the parts that I have planned for the PM work orders coming up, I would check this box right here to use work order planned quantity in the calculation. So what that's going to do is anything that's planned, and so anything that's in our that we see on our work planning screen as a planned quantity, it's going to assume we're going to use that. So it assumes you're going to use it and it orders to replace it. So if you've got 2 on hand but you're planning to use 5, well, it's going to order enough that to make sure that once you use 5, you still have above your minimum quantity. We can also tell it to use unapproved requisitions or quantities on order in the calculation, so that if somebody else already ordered it, or if you already ran the automatic reorder process and you check that box, then it won't order them a second time. Okay, that way you avoid having duplicate purchases. Down here, this is where we say to either order the reorder quantity or to order to obtain the maximum inventory quantity. So if I say order the reorder quantity, then no matter how many I need or how many are planned, it's still only going to order that reorder quantity of 3. If I order to obtain the maximum quantity, then it's going to order to bring me up to 5. So if I've got 2 on hand and I'm planning to use 5 and I want to bring it up to 5, then it's going to have to order enough. It's going to have to order enough to cover all those ones I'm planning to use, plus bring me up to the maximum. And I can use my planned quantities and my requisitions and purchases in the calculation there as well. So then once I've got my criteria set, I hit OK. It's going to check my whole warehouse and see which parts need to be ordered. Again, Cincinnati is a very small warehouse. We don't have a lot in there. So it keeps it manageable for us. We have 9 parts that need to be ordered. Each one of them, you'll notice the minimum is at or below the maximum, or the on-hand quantity, or sorry, the on-hand quantity is at or below the minimum quantity. Okay. If I'm going to order these, if I want to order all of these, I can just hit select all, okay, and it's going to order them. Before I do that, and I'm going to do that in a moment, but before I do that, I want to talk about the people who are not purchasing in Directline. Because just because you're not purchasing in Directline doesn't mean you can't use this automatic reorder process to help you keep track of what you need. What we can do is we can use this just as a report. So we ran that automatic reorder. We put in our criteria. This is showing us all the part numbers we need to order. It's showing us all the suppliers we need to order from. We can see how many are on hand and where we're at with our minimums. And we can just hit the export button right here. And on this export, and now we've got an Excel spreadsheet that has all that same information. So now I could take this Excel spreadsheet and I could save it, I could print it, I could hit file, share, and email it, and just send it to my purchasing department and say, here, we need to order these parts. And so I work with a lot of clients who are not purchasing in Directline because their finance department uses another software, or purchasing uses another software, and that's fine. You can still use this to track your inventory. You can still stay on top of your inventory in Directline, and this is one of the things that can help you with that. If we want to order these parts, so we're doing purchasing in Directline, we want to order these parts. Well, we see here we've got a number of suppliers: Canadian Bearings, Allen Bradley, Ace Hardware. Now, this is not going to create 9 requisitions. What it's going to do, and I'm going to sort by supplier so we can see it here, it's going to create a requisition for Ace Hardware, right? That's those two. It's going to create a requisition for Acme Motors. It's going to create a requisition for Allen Bradley, but it's only going to create one, right? It's only going to create one Bearing Supply Canada requisition. It's just going to put all 3 parts on that. So when we run this, we should get 5 requisitions. So if I hit select all and I hit OK, it tells me 5 requisitions created because it's combining those parts. So you're not going to be inundating a supplier with requisitions with 1 part on each one. You're not going to have to tell your manager, I need you to approve 50 requisitions for Motion Canada because we need 50 parts. You're just going to get one requisition, and it's going to have all those parts and your costs totaled and everything. So just like that, we ran that automatic reorder process. We created 5 requisitions. Now there's 5 requisitions that can be approved and turned to POs. So that automatic reordering, it's going to keep our inventory up to date. It's going to keep us from running low on the things we need, on the critical items, on the spare parts we need. Going to keep that bolt bin from running empty. Even because we're going to, by using that automatic reorder. Does anybody have any questions about the automatic reorder?
Yeah, Jamie Thine, he was wondering if your max, let's say in a situation where it is 5, but the supplier, happens to sell in a box of 12, what's going to happen with your reorder?
It's still going to reorder that 1 box of 12, and you're going to end up going over your maximum every time. Okay. So that becomes where you have to look at it and say, okay, well, is that going to be my max? Should my maximum then be 12?
Yes, I was going to say that's where you maybe decide I should have 12 as my thing.
Yeah, exactly, because it is still gonna order that one from the supplier, and it's going to be 12.
And I was wondering if you could touch, I know we're doing inventory, but on the purchase order process briefly?
We don't have time to touch on purchase orders today. We will do another webinar on purchasing in a couple of months, but whoever needs help with purchasing or wants to talk about purchasing, even if you just want a demo, you can reach out to Matt or reach out to support, and we'll get a session set up where we can show you all about purchasing.
And this might be along the same vein, but if you have 3 suppliers for one particular item, how does that end up working? So you get to select, I guess, the one you want.
Yep. So when you look at any part, and this is probably something I should have mentioned when we were looking at our part here, we can have we have 1 supplier listed for this part, but we could list multiple suppliers. So I'm just gonna add 2 more suppliers to our part here. Okay, so I've got three suppliers that I can order from, or I guess I just put 2. Yeah, I got 2 suppliers that I can order from. The one that's highlighted in yellow, that's going to be my preferred supplier. So that's the one, when I run the automatic reorder, that by default it's going to order from that supplier. However, we don't have to order from that supplier. If we go to our automatic reorder, I'm just going to quickly run this again so I can show you. With any part that has multiple suppliers, we can change the supplier, or sorry, with any part, when we're on this automatic reorder screen, we can change the supplier we're ordering from. So we could take this one here, and if we say, well, listen, we're already putting an order in with Bearing Supply Canada, let's get this part from them as well. I can double click on that part, and there's a button here that says select from detail record. I can't choose that because I didn't save my inventory detail record, but I can hit search all suppliers, and I can find another supplier. I could switch this right here to Bearing Supply Canada. So I can change that. So now I'm only ordering from Bearing Supply Canada.
And as you mentioned, the highlighted one, Maryland's asking, how can you assign the default supplier? I think it's just that top one. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's the one that's highlighted in yellow. If I wanted to make Anderson Controls my default supplier, we just double click on it. And then it says confirm your choice. And we say yes. And now Anderson Controls is on top and it's highlighted in yellow. It actually says it right here. Double click a supplier to make it the preferred supplier. So that's all we need to do.
Perfect. I think those are the questions.
All right. Okay. So now we're going to get into the last piece, which is it's kind of the biggest piece of what I wanted to talk about today. So we definitely ran longer than I expected, but I'll try not to drag it out too much. And this part is physical counts, and the biggest piece of this that I want to talk about is using categories to improve your physical count process or your cycle counting process. So why are we doing cycle counts? We're on a schedule basis. We're using cycle counts of a specific item to compare the actual count. So compare what's on the shelf to the perpetual count in Directline. And I say our perpetual count in Directline is the on-hand quantity, which is equal to the number of parts you received minus the number of parts you've issued. And I guess you would throw in there any adjustments that were made for loss or damaged parts or things like that. So this is that's why we're doing cycle counts. We're doing cycle counts to compare that. The frequency of the count for each individual part doesn't have to be the same. You're not counting the bolts in the bolt bin at the same rate as you're counting a critical part that causes downtime, right? The motor that runs your lathe, or the parts that are critical or hard to get. You're going to want to count more often. You're going to want to make sure you control it more and know that those parts are going to be there. So there's a recommendation here. All items should be counted at least once per year, but you may count some of them may be counted up to 4 times a year. Using this method means that count and financial adjustments are made dynamically. So you're doing the adjustments in increments throughout the year, rather than and I've seen this practice many times where people will count the whole warehouse once a year. They'll shut everything down, count the warehouse, and then they do massive adjustments because they haven't been counting through the year. They haven't found those small losses, and then they've added up to big losses. So the piece that I want to show you here, and because it's something that not a lot of people are using, is categories. And we find the category field on the inventory detail entry screen in the top right hand corner, the category. Okay, we see it's on the inventory header entry screen as well. And this is the category of the part. So we use by default, that category field is meant to be used for the ABC analysis method. Okay, this is going to establish a degree of control for each part. So each category, A, B, and C, will contain parts that are different levels of criticality and value. This can be used to set the rate at which the part is counted, as well as how much control or security is required for it. And we're going to go through each category right now. So category A, these are your high value parts. These are the parts that are going to require the tightest control and follow-up. So these are expensive parts, parts that have long lead times, parts that are that are critical, that if you don't have that part, production shuts down. Okay, these are your category A parts. They're the ones you need to make sure you have. These parts are generally the top 20% of your inventory, and they usually make up about 80% of your total inventory value. Okay, so they're the most, you have the fewest of them, but they're usually the most expensive ones. And these should be counted or the recommendation is these are counted quarterly. So you're counting these 4 times a year to make sure you have them on hand. Category B, these are your mid-value parts. These are parts that they're important to keep your machine, keep your equipment running. They're important to keep you keep your processes moving, but they're usually available to be sourced locally. They're not one-off parts. They're parts that are usually available locally or can be bought overnight. And they're normally parts that are used on multiple equipment. They make up the next 30% of your inventory, and they usually represent about 15% of your total inventory value. So you would count these semi-annually. You want to have a good idea of how many of each of these parts you have on hand, but they're not as critical as your category A. And then your last one is your category C's. These are your low valued items. These are your nuts and bolts, your expendable tools, drill bits, saw blades, spray lubricants. These number wise will make up about 50% of your inventory, right? And almost half of your whole inventory is going to be these small inconsequential parts. They are about 50% of your inventory, but they only make up about 5% of your inventory's value. And these normally don't have a lot of control. You're counting them once a year just to make sure that you're not completely off. But this is the stuff that's not necessarily locked in the cage. It's in the bolt bins outside of the cage. So let me show you how to set up these categories, and then we're going to run a physical count using these categories. So when we look at our inventory detail entry screen, and let's bring up our same part that we've been picking on all along. We set our category right here. So if I hit the drop down on category, we've got A, B, and C. So let's find out what those A, B, and C mean. So I'm going to go to the administration module, and I'm going to go to inventory and category code entry. So it's collecting warehouse information because it needs to know how many parts are in each one of these categories. So we're going to hit the drop down here on category, and I'm going to look at code A. So when we set this up, we have a description here. It's the top 20%. That's not the default in the system. That's the adjusted numbers that I found when I was setting up the presentation. The default in your system will probably say 10%, but that's really up to you what your category A is. Right? You have the ability to set all this. It's just these are the recommendations that we found. We're going to check this box to include this category in physical count selection process. That way, when we're running our physical count, we can run it by category, and we can count some category A's. We can set the number of days that these are available to count per year, and the number of times per year that we're going to count these items. So we're counting them 4 times a year. They're available four times, so we're going to count all of the category A's each time they're available to count. If I had if I had 120 category A parts, I might say, well, let's make them available 12 times a year so that I don't have to count every one of the category A's each time I count. I would just have, it would just give me a number of them each time. If I look at my category B's, again, I set it to 2 days per year available to count, and we're going to count them twice a year. So we're going to count these semi-annually, counting the A's quarterly, B's semi-annually, and our C's, we're saying they're available 5 times a year, and we're counting them once per year. Or sorry, they're available 2 days per year, and we're counting them once a year. So we're going to count half of them each time we count. So that's how we would set this up. And you can use your own category codes. You don't have to use A, B, and C. This is a standard inventory management practice, but that doesn't mean it's what you have to do. It doesn't mean that it's what will work best for you. But if you look in your system and you go to the inventory category code entry, this is what you'll see. You'll see A, B, and C, and you'll see different percentages, but these are the codes you'll have. So once we've got those codes set up, we're going to run a physical count. So we're going to find our physical count management under inventory, and there's a physical count management section right here. And there are a number of screens within that physical count section. And so here's how they're going to be used. So here's the steps for a physical count. We need to first select the inventory that needs to be counted. We can do that in a number of ways. Today we're going to do it with category codes. The next one is a physical count batch entry. So after we select our inventory to be counted, we can either print out a list of the inventory we're going to count, or we can take it over to our mobile and we can count it. Okay, and I'm going to show you both ways to do that. Then we're going to use our physical count reporting, and we're going to find the problems. Where did we run into? What parts are missing? What needs to be? What do we need to find? And then we're going to update our on-hand quantity from our physical count. So this is when we're actually updating the on-hand quantity. So we enter our counts, but that doesn't update anything until we do that last step. So let's do this quickly. So we're going to select our inventory to be counted. And we can do this a couple of different ways. I'm going to choose my warehouse. I'm going to go back to Cincinnati. And you see here when we say use inventory, it defaults to use inventory category codes. So here's our codes, A, B, and C. And it tells us the number of parts that it's going to count for each category. And in this case, we're going to get 1. Remember, the Cincinnati warehouse is a very small warehouse, so we're not getting we're not counting a lot. So there are other ways that we can do it as well. So we could do a full inventory count. We can use items manually selected for count, which we do in the inventory detail entry. Or if we're on the category code one, we could hit the little plus sign here and we can add specific inventories to our count if we want to. So even if they don't match these categories, we can still add them in. So now we should be able to hit OK here. I think I may have accidentally run this already. Tell me my number of items is 0. Okay, so I think I accidentally ran this when I was testing earlier, so it's not going to show us any. So let's do it this way. Let's add some specific inventories. We're in our warehouse CCH. Oh, let's change that to Cincinnati. And let's just add our whole list of parts in Cincinnati. And now when we hit OK, what it's gonna do, we're gonna check this export box because I want to show you the spreadsheet. So it creates a count identifier 1029. And when it creates that count identifier, it puts 9 physical count records in there. So there's 9 parts that need to be counted. And then it's bringing me to this physical count reporting section where we can bring up this spreadsheet of parts to be counted. So we've got our 9 parts listed here, the aisle, shelf, and bin where they're stored, the unit of measure, and a counted quantity section. So I can print this out. I can put it on a clipboard, and I can go and do my counts right in my warehouse. Okay. Once I've done that, and this spreadsheet is designed to be printed, so it's going to print on one page. Once I put in my counted quantities, or once I've wrote them all down, I'm going to go to step 2, which was our physical count batch entry, which we're going to find right here. I'm going to choose my count 1029, and I'm going to put in the quantities that I counted. And you'll notice at no point does it show me the on-hand quantity from the system. And that's so that it doesn't no one's pulling counts right from the system. They're actually counting what's on the shelf. So you can put in your counts right here, and then you can run your reports. But I want to show you one other way that we can do it. So we created that physical count list. We created that list of parts that we're going to count. And what we can do is we can flip right over to our mobile system. That's where I'm at right here. I'm logged into the mobile. And if I go on the mobile, there's a whole inventory section. So a couple of things I can do with inventory on mobile. I can go to new issue, and I can issue parts to a work order right from my mobile. When I do this is going to automatically update my on-hand quantities, or immediately update my on-hand quantities. So if
Hi, Cory. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt right here, but I am going to have to go for now. I appreciate everyone who showed up. And you can still write your questions in the chat, and Cory will take them when he brings up the question time.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Matt.
No problem. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
So with our issues right here, we can issue parts to work orders, and it is going to immediately update our on-hand quantities. So we're not there's no waiting. Well, there's no waiting. It is an immediate thing, just like everything else in mobile. We can do inventory adjustments from here. We can do inventory searches, and we can even do part updates from our mobile. And what the part update does is it lets us look up a part the warehouse that it's in, and we can do updates here. So if we're moving it to a different location, we can change the aisle, shelf, and bin. If we found a typo in the manufacturer's part number, we could change that. If we wanted to attach a picture to this inventory item, we can hit documents down here, and we can use our camera to take a picture of that item and attach it to the part. So we can do all of that right here from our mobile. Okay, so there is a full inventory. Now, there is an inventory section in mobile. It doesn't do everything that you can do in the desktop, but it does let you do a lot of the things that you would want to do when you're standing at a shelf, right? If you're standing in the warehouse at a shelf, you can do a lot of things with the mobile, like all these updates, like physical counts. If I go to a physical count list, here's my count that we just created, 1029. Well, now I can count all these parts. So here's all the parts. If I go to entry, now I can put in or sorry, I select my part, I can put in the quantity that I counted. And I can do this for every one of these parts. Oh. So now I've put in my counted quantities. And now when I go back to my inventory module on the desktop, all my counted quantities are in here. Right? So now I've counted them right from my mobile device. So I've got my phone or my tablet, and I'm standing at the shelf, and I'm putting in the actual quantities as I count them. So that was our step 2. And we can do it 2 ways, using the physical count batch entry or using the mobile. Then we can use our physical count reporting to figure out how accurate our inventory is. So I first select my account ID, 1029 is the one I'm checking on, and I can do count exceptions. When I select that and hit OK, it's going to show me every part that the counted quantity was different from the system on hand quantity. So we can see here our system on hand quantity was 4. I only counted 1. Our on hand quantity here was 1, and I counted 0. So I can see the on hand quantity difference as well as the value difference for each of those parts. Now, if I looked at this and I said, well, there shouldn't be three of those missing, I go back to the shelf and I find them, I can still go to my batch entry and I can still update that. Right? I can still go back to my batch entry right here, and I could change that part. So that's our second piece, and we can run those reports and we can print those reports, and then once we're happy with our count, we know for sure that we've done an accurate count, we can update our on-hand quantity from physical counts and select our physical count that we want to update, and then here it's telling me the records that are ready to be processed. There's 9 because we put in quantities for 9 of them. Records to ignore, these would be ones where we did not enter a quantity, and those are all 0. Then we just hit update on hand quantity, and now that processes those 9 records, and now the inventory, the on hand quantity for each of those parts will have been updated to match what we counted. So that's our physical count management module. It's a very powerful module. It's actually quite easy to use, even though there are a few steps to it. Those steps are there because they're necessary and because they provide value to your to your process. The categories, the A, B, and C categories, it's not necessary that you use that when you're to use that in conjunction with physical count management, but it does add some structure to your physical counts. So one more time, I'll ask, are there any questions? Okay. I see a question here from Marilyn. Yes, Marilyn, you need to identify which parts parts to count from the PC, and then once you from your PC run that select inventory to be counted, then once it creates that list, then that list is available on mobile. But you do have to do the selection from your PC. Can multiple users update inventory via mobile at the same time? Yes, they can. That list is available to anyone who has access to inventory on mobile. And if someone has already filled in a counted quantity, then everyone who's into that list will see that counted quantity. Is there any way to update on-hand quantity and not get into the PC, just do it on mobile? No, there is not. You do have to update the on-hand quantity from the PC. You do have to do that final step from the PC, and the reason for that is that you would want to run your reports. You'd want to run your reports before you update your on-hand quantities. Otherwise, you're not counting. you're losing half of the reason you're counting, right? So you want to run those reports, and there is no reporting available in mobile. So there is no shortcut. There's no shortcut there. All right. Are there any other questions? And I mean questions about anything we talked about today. Okay. Like, thank you all very much for joining. Oh, Marilyn, you had one more? One already. Yes, there is a setting on your sorry, Marilyn's question was when you already update the on-hand quantity and some of them didn't get counted, can we go back from that count identifier? And yes, you can. When we look at that update, and you remember the records to ignore or bypass, that part there, you can, when you're doing this, you can select whether to leave them alone or delete them or move them to history. So if you just say leave alone, then you'll be able to go back and count those ones that you didn't enter quantities for. So it's just a matter of setting that setting that leave alone, which will be the default anyway. If Marilyn, if your setting was automatic, it was set to archive, likely that got changed at some point. So if it and once you change it, it'll stay on that archive until you change it back. But the next time you run it, just change it to leave alone. All right. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm sorry we did go a little long. I thought this was going to be a short one, but it's been the longest one yet. I really appreciate everyone attending. If you want to know more information about inventory, you can always call our support line or email our support line, and we can set up. They can answer your questions, or we can set up training. And you can find more information about inventory and other modules on our YouTube channel. You can just search Megamation, or Megamation 4582 is our actual channel, and please subscribe, and you'll get notifications every time we post a new video. Thank you all very much, and have a great day.